Chapter 4, Shattered Reality. Simon's mouth went dry. The words "my wife" echoed in his head like a cruel taunt, disorienting him in his drunken state. He staggered back a step, his gaze shifting from the man standing in front of him to the dark apartment behind. His mind raced. Wife. Melissa had remarried? So soon. Melissa's wife. Simon choked out, his voice barely a whisper as the realization sank in. He felt as though the ground had shifted beneath him, his certainty about Melissa's future, about their future, cracking apart. The man, still leaning casually in the doorway, sighed in annoyance, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Yeah, you heard me right. Wife. Now, if you don't mind," he started to shut the door, but Simon's hand shot out to stop him. "Wait," Simon gasped, pushing back against the door, desperate for answers. Who are you?" The man paused, giving Simon a cold, scrutinizing look. "I'm Anthony." His eyes narrowed. "And you're the ex-husband, I take it." "Ex." Simon's voice trailed off, his heart pounding louder in his ears. He couldn't believe this. Melissa had moved on, remarried, and found someone new so easily. It didn't make sense. His mind struggled to catch up with the implications. Anthony stepped closer, his expression hardening. "Listen, Simon. I don't know what you're trying to do here, but you're not welcome in her life anymore. You've had your shot, and you blew it. She's moved on, and so should you." The finality in his tone cut through Simon like a blade. The door slammed shut, leaving Simon standing alone in the dimly lit hallway, reeling from the shock. He stumbled back, running his hands through his hair in disbelief. Melissa was gone. The woman who had quietly endured his indifference, his cruelty, and his selfishness had truly left him behind. And now she had found someone else, a man who seemed to be everything he wasn't. The realization hit Simon with a force he wasn't prepared for. He had always assumed that Melissa would be waiting in the wings, helpless without him. That she would come crawling back, begging for another chance. But the image of her moving on, really moving on, was something he had never considered. Suddenly, the weight of what he had lost came crashing down on him. Chapter 5, The Void Left Behind. In the following days, Simon's world spiraled into chaos. He tried to throw himself into work, but nothing felt the same. The meetings, the business deals, the power plays that once filled him with satisfaction all felt hollow. He found himself thinking about Melissa at every turn, her quiet strength, her unwavering support, and the way she had always been there when he needed her, even if he had never acknowledged it. Chloe, sensing the shift in Simon's mood, became increasingly frustrated. She had moved into his life with the expectation of wealth and excitement, but Simon was no longer the charming, confident man she had pursued. He was distant, distracted, and worst of all, obsessed with the woman he had discarded. "You need to let her go," Chloe snapped one evening as Simon sat brooding in their living room. "She's out of your life now. Why are you still so hung up on her?" But Simon couldn't answer. He didn't know how to explain the ache that had settled in his chest, the emptiness that Melissa's absence had left behind. He had taken her for granted, believing she would always be there, no matter how poorly he treated her. But now that she was truly gone, he realized too late how much she had meant to him. Chloe, growing increasingly frustrated, packed her things and left within weeks. Simon didn't try to stop her. He hardly noticed when she was gone. Alone in the house that had once been filled with Melissa's presence, Simon found himself haunted by memories. Every room, every corner reminded him of her. He spent hours staring at the empty spot on the mantel where their wedding photo had once stood, the shattered glass still etched into his mind. For the first time in his life, Simon felt the weight of regret pressing down on him. He had destroyed the one thing that had truly mattered, his marriage, and there was no way to fix it. Chapter 6, Desperate Measures. Months passed, and Simon's obsession with Melissa only grew. He tried to find out more about her new life, asking mutual acquaintances for information, but no one seemed to know much. All he knew was that she was with Anthony now, living a life free from the chains of their past. But the uncertainty drove him mad. He needed to see her, to understand how she had moved on so easily when he was trapped in this prison of his own making. He convinced himself that if he could just talk to her, He might be able to explain, might be able to win her back. One evening, unable to bear the torment any longer, Simon made his way back to her apartment. He had no plan, no clear idea of what he would say. All he knew was that he needed to see her, to remind her of what they once had, to convince her that he had changed. He knocked on her door, his heart pounding with anticipation and dread. When the door opened, it wasn't Anthony this time, but Melissa herself. She stood there, her expression unreadable as she looked at the man who had once been her husband. She didn't seem surprised to see him, if anything, she looked resigned, as if she had been expecting this moment. "Melissa," Simon breathed, his voice thick with emotion. I just wanted to talk. Can we talk?" Melissa stepped out into the hallway, closing the door behind her. She crossed her arms, her eyes cool and distant, nothing like the woman he had once known. "What do you want, Simon?" she asked, her tone flat. Simon swallowed hard, the words he had rehearsed suddenly stuck in his throat. Seeing her now, so composed and self-assured, made him realize just how far apart they had grown. She wasn't the timid, broken woman he had left behind. She was stronger, more confident, someone he barely recognized. I made a mistake," he stammered, his voice cracking with desperation. "I didn't realize what I had until it was too late. I was wrong, Melissa. About everything. I treated you terribly, and I'm sorry." Melissa's expression didn't change. She listened, but her eyes remained distant, as if his words no longer had any power over her. "Simon," she said softly, "I've moved on. You need to do the same." The finality in her voice cut through him, sharper than any words he had ever heard. "I loved you," Simon whispered, his heart breaking as he spoke the truth he had been too proud to admit. "I didn't realize it until you were gone. Please, Melissa, give me another chance." Melissa's gaze softened for a brief moment, but then she shook her head, her resolve unshaken. "Simon, it's too late. You had your chance, and you threw it away. I've built a new life now, and I'm happy. You need to let me go." Chapter 7, The Final Goodbye. Simon stood there, unable to speak, as Melissa's words sank in. She had moved on, truly and completely, and there was no place for him in her life anymore. He had lost her, and there was no way to win her back. For the first time in his life, Simon Zhao realized that some mistakes couldn't be undone. With a heavy heart, Simon turned and walked away, leaving Melissa behind for the final time. As he disappeared into the night, Melissa watched him go, feeling a strange mix of sorrow and relief. She had loved him once, but that love had been eroded by years of neglect and cruelty. Now, she was free. As she closed the door, Melissa took a deep breath and smiled. She had reclaimed her life, her independence, and her happiness. And for the first time in years, she felt whole. Simon, however, was left with nothing but the ghosts of his past, haunted by the woman he had loved too late and the life he had destroyed with his own hands.